Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Java Basics. Today we're going to be talking about methods. What are they and how we create them? So let's jump right in. If you want to learn Java programming or just programming in general, subscribe to this channel. We put out a lot of videos that range from beginner topics to more advanced programming concepts. Also, please like this video, share it with a friend, and write a comment as well. It goes a long way to help promote a channel like this. Now, let's get back to the video. A method is really just a bunch of code that performs a certain task. Now, the benefit of writing a method is that you can call it over and over again without duplicating the code. For example, if you want it to do its job multiple times, you just have to write it once and you can tell it, do your job, do it again, and you don't have to duplicate the code. Now, we have already programmed one method every time we make a new class, and that method is main. So what are the different parts of a method? Well, here's an example of a method called print numbers. The job of this method is to print the numbers 1 through 10. This part here is the name of the method, print numbers. Now notice the convention. It starts with a lowercase letter, the first word, then every subsequent word starts with a capital letter, lowercase p for print, uppercase N for numbers. This is the method body. This is where the method actually does its job. Now, this could be one line of code, as you see here. It could be hundreds or thousands of lines of code. Anything that's between these two brackets is what the method will do when you ask it to do its job. And here's how you ask it to do its job. In main, we can call the method print numbers. We just type the name of the method, parentheses, open, close, and a semicolon. When we call the method the first time, the method will do its job, print the numbers 1 through 10, and then we can call it again without having to duplicate this code, and it will just do its job a second time. Let's see how it looks in NetBeans. Here's everything we have on the slide, and if we run the program, you can see it prints the numbers 1 through 10 twice. We're telling the method do its job, then we're telling it to do its job again. Each time it will do whatever is in here. Let's write a method that will print a greeting, hello, followed by someone's name. Here's what it looks like. We have the name of the method, print greeting, but in this case, the method needs more information in order to do its job. In other words, it needs to know the name of the person it's greeting. So we handle that using something called a parameter. What information are we going to have to tell this method in order for it to do its job? Well, we need the name. The name is a string, and we're going to pass in the name in the form of a parameter. Let's see how it works in NetBeans. So underneath our print numbers method, let's make a new method. Now, this method, called print greeting, is going to accept a variable, and that variable is called name. This is going to be populated with the name of the person we want to greet. What's the job of the method? Well, the job of the method is to print hello, followed by whatever name we tell it. So we're printing hello, space, and we concatenate it with name. Now, how do we call this method? Well, we no longer need to call print numbers, so let's get rid of those. Now we want to call print greeting. Now you notice when I call print greeting, if I do it the same way as print numbers, it's underlined in red. The reason why it's underlined in red is because we're not calling it properly. With print numbers, we did it exactly like this. With print greeting, you notice that print greeting needs information. It's expecting a name to be given to it so it knows how to do its job. Well, we haven't given it any information. We need to tell it the name of the person that we want to greet. And now we can do it again. If we run this, we should expect a greeting for Laura, followed by a greeting for Bob. And that's exactly what we get. Now, what are the mechanics of this? Well, we're telling Java to run this method, and then we're putting a value inside these parentheses. This value is a string, and the value is Laura. So what happens when Java runs this is it takes this value and it puts the value into this variable for the purposes of running this method. So then when we run the method and we print the variable, that variable has a value of Laura. When we call the method again, everything gets cleared away because we're starting fresh. So this variable no longer contains Laura. It's now a new variable and it's blank. However, when we pass in the value Bob actually gets put into this variable name. And now, for the purposes of this time around in the method, the variable name has a value of Bob. Every time you run a method and you exit, in other words, when you finish all of the code in here and you get to the ending bracket, all of the variables inside this method go away. They don't retain their older values. Now, sometimes a method not only needs additional information to do its job, but it also has to give you an answer. So in this case, we're going to write a method that will add two numbers. That's equivalent to the request, please add the numbers 4 and 5 and tell me the answer. Here's our method declaration. Now, this looks kind of similar to what we did before. Here are a couple of differences. The first is we actually have two parameters this time, because the method, in order to add two numbers, needs to know both numbers. So here we have an integer a followed by an integer b. Those are the two numbers we are going to add. The other difference is we have something here. Instead of the word void, which is what we had in the prior method, and we'll talk about what that means later, we have something called int. Now this is called the return type. In other words, what kind of answer are we expecting? Well, if we add a and b, we should expect to get an integer answer. So that is why this here says int, because we are expecting to get an answer that will be an integer. Let's try it in NetBeans. So here underneath print greeting, we're going to create a new method. As you can see, here are the two parameters, a and b. When we call this method, the first value will go into a, the second value will go into b, and we can use those variables however we like. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to declare a new variable, integer sum, and that's going to be equal to a plus b. Now, how do we actually return the answer? How do we tell this method that we should respond with the answer sum? Well, the way we do that is with a return statement. Return sum. What we're saying here is whoever called this method, we're going to return to you the answer, sum. Now let's see how that looks in main. We don't need to call print greeting anymore. Instead, we're going to call add numbers. And we're going to say, let's add the numbers 4 and 5. Now don't forget, this method is going to answer you. It's going to return an integer. So this method, whatever it returns, can be assigned into a variable. And we do it as follows. We declare a new variable called answer, and we say that answer is going to be equal to whatever this method returns. In this case, it's going to return the sum of 4 and 5, which should be 9. Now we can print that. Let's test it out. As you can see, it prints it perfectly. The sum of 4 and 5 is whatever this variable is. This variable is an integer, and it gets whatever this method returns. Now let's jump back here for a minute to our print greeting. Notice the return type. The return type here is void. What does that mean? Well, whenever you use the word void, that means that this method is not going to return any answer to you. This method's job is simply to print a greeting. You're not expecting an answer like when we added the two numbers. Here, it does its job, and that's it. Now let's talk about the final two parts of the method. The first thing is this word static. Now we are going to be talking about this in detail in a future video when we get into more advanced topics. For now, I want to say a couple of things. First, most of the methods that you write will not have this word static. However, because the main method is declared with the word static, any methods that you call from within the main method also have to have the word static or it will not work. But like I said, in most cases, once we get into more advanced topics, you will not be using the word static, but in some cases you might. This word public, again, we will talk about that later when we get into more advanced topics in a future video. But for right now, All I'm going to say is that this word determines which parts of your code are allowed to call this method. In other words, it's the access. Who has access to call this method? If it's the word public, it means that every piece of code within your project can call this method. Again, we'll talk about that later. For now, let's try an example. So your job is to write a method that will return whether or not you are either a Jedi, or a member of the First Order, or you're not a member of either faction. Pause the video and give it a try. I'm going to give you a hint in a few seconds, so if you don't want the hint, pause the video and try this on your own. Here's the hint. The declaration is right here. The method name will be called checkFaction. This is the parameter. We need to know the person's name in order to check their faction. So we pass in a parameter that's a string, and we'll call the variable name. This is the return type. This method is going to return the faction that you're in. It's either going to return the word Jedi, First Order, or none. So that in that case, we need to return a string. Now that you've gotten your hint, pause the video and see if you can write this method on your own. Okay, let's try it. First things first, let's get rid of all this unnecessary code. And now let's write our method. Now, you notice real quick that this final bracket is underlined in red. The reason why that's underlined in red is because this method is supposed to return a string. It's not returning anything yet. In other words, I need to have some return statement here that says whatever. Okay, as long as I have that return statement, this will no longer be underlined in red. But since I haven't gotten to it yet, it is underlined in red, showing that there's an error here. If you hover over it, you'll see it says missing return statement. So let's check the faction of name. So we know that we want to check if the name equals Luke or name equals Yoda, then we want to return Jedi. However, if the name equals Kylo or Snoke, then we are going to return First Order. Otherwise, we are going to return none. Now let's call the method from main. Check faction. Let's try Luke. And don't forget, this method is going to return the answer. It's going to return a string with the faction name that this person is in. So we need a variable. We'll call it faction1 equals, and then whatever this returns. But we want to try this multiple times. So let me copy and paste this code. Let's try it 5 times. We'll call it F2, 3, 4, and 5. And in this case, we'll check Kylo. Let's check Snoke. We'll check Jonathan. And finally, let's check Yoda. So what would we expect? We would expect Jedi, First Order, none, Jedi. Let's see. Oh, it didn't do anything. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at the code. This method is not printing anything, it's returning the answer. Yes, it assigns the value to these variables, but we're never printing these variables. F1, and let's copy and paste, and we will print all of them. Now let's try it. And we got it. Jedi, Luke, First Order, none, and Jedi. Perfect. I hope you learned something from watching this video. Please remember to subscribe and share this video with others who are learning Java programming. Thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.